Welcome to the Loaded Goat. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Christopher.
Hi, Christopher. Before we dive into this episode,
let's just break it down first.
I want to talk about last week we did Opie's Fortune, which is a really heartwarming story about Opie finding $50 and then thinking he gets to keep it, learning someone else if some belongs to someone else, and giving it back. Right after we do this episode, or right around the time we do this episode, we get a story of a guy in Connecticut who found $5,000 in a parking lot, kept it, and now may go to jail.
Yep.
I'm just glad that didn't shake out that way for Opie.
Yeah, I know, but his dad works there, so it's not like it would be that bad for him. He'd still get the same meals he gets at home from Aunt B. Basically the same thing.
I mean, yeah, I guess you would get to spend time with his pa all day, and they're not going to send him to a juvenile hall or juvenile correctional facility.
Yeah, but it is a humdinger, right? It makes you think twice before, that's the true American dream is prosperity you find on the street,
Yeah. So. I mean, that's what I've like No Country for Old Men. Story about the American dream, finding a bunch of drug money and basically, being on the run for the rest of your life, your short life.
The only thing I'd add to that is that you got to strap the money around your torso like Mark Wahlberg in Contraband.
I've watched a lot of Mark Wahlberg's movies. I have not seen Contraband.
Oh, really good.
All right. Well, we can revisit that another day. Today we're doing Goodbye Sheriff Taylor, and I enjoyed this episode. It's that we've seen other episodes where Barney's left in charge, but I thought they did a nice little twist on this.
Yeah, I totally agree too. My only complaint about this episode is Andy Griffith is so low energy. I thought through the show, and it felt off. He seemed disconnected, and I'm not saying it's the character. I think it was like a performance issue.
I guess if you're basically doing an episode, if you're doing like a series where this is your hometown and this is where you want to be sheriff and this is where this is where you want to raise your family, and then you're doing an episode about where you're on the fence about leaving, maybe the only way he could think to play it at that time was just to kind of be a little aloof.
Yeah, maybe.
Or maybe he was just in a bad mood that week.
Yeah, he needed some vitamins or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Could have had a cold. Maybe Randy Turner knows.
He probably had COVID.
It wasn't started in a lab. It was started somewhere in on the set of Desilu in 1965.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this episode first aired on November 23rd, 1964, and we open with Andy on the phone talking about an offer for a new job in Raleigh. And Barney comes in and leans in tries to listen, and Andy shoos him away. And Andy says he's going to go up and meet with these folks the next day. And it turns out the Hogarth detectives offered him a job. And I don't think they're actually like federal or state detectives. I think they sound like the Pinkerton agency. You know who the Pinkertons are?
No.
They've been around for since the 1800s. But they're basically a hired group of detectives who go in and help companies and others with security, but also with kind of private investigator work. If you see westerns about people robbing railroads, they hate the Pinkertons because the Pinkertons are the ones who come in and take them out.
So it's like Mossad or Blackwater or any of those.
It would
the Wagner Group.
If you were going to say the way they are portrayed like in Western. I don't think they're this way now. They've been around for a long, long time, but they were portrayed in old Westerns as almost like sadistic mercenary contractors who were serving the interests of the railroad.
Okay.
Naturally, Barney is upset, and Andy tries to explain that he's been sheriff for 12 years, and it may be time to make a change. And then Andy throws out the idea of Barney being sheriff. And Andy says he picked him for the job without thinking twice. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, this is where he's not actually considering the role, I think.
You know what I think the thing is he's not being true to character here.
Yep, I would agree with that.
And naturally, Barney now is a little more okay with Andy taking the job. And then Andy leaves, and Barney starts feeling like this might be the job for him. And he sits down in Andy's chair to lean back, and he falls over. And that's a great physical comedy.
Good learning curve.
Yeah. And then Opie asks when he thinks they may move, and he wants to move before his spelling test. And Andy breaks it to Opie that they have spelling tests in Raleigh, too. And then Opie goes out to play.
Andy wasn't very good at, well, we'll get to this, but I did like what Aunt B says here. She comes in and she's like, you weren't good at this either.
No. But she said the thing she says, the more appropriate thing comes up when she says she hopes Andy is making the right move. And Andy says the town runs itself. And he says if Barney takes over as sheriff, it might run itself into the ground.
Which is correct.
And we dissolve to the jail the next day with Barney acting as a drill sergeant to his deputies. You got Goober, Judd, and Otis.
We've met Goober before, right?
Okay, we're going to now start seeing a lot more of Goober.
Yeah, I knew that he became a character. Was this the first time we've seen him?
No, he came in with the Fun Girls episode with Gomer.
Oh, yeah,
going to the movies. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And so Barney says if they don't want to do this, they can walk out the door and there will be no hard feelings. And they all start to leave, and Barney stops them. And he tests Goober's reflexes by tossing an egg at him, and then says there are only two kinds of cops, the quick and the dead. And he calls out Otis, and to test his reflexes, he takes a tomato and throws it at him, and it explodes on his chest. And Otis is naturally not too happy about this.
No, and it also, they must have done a couple of different shoots of this, because it first hits him and it's a little splatter, and then I think the next image it's like everywhere, and then it's like even further from there.
Oh yeah, it's a lot. And then Andy comes in and asks what is going on, and he pulls Barney aside and asks if he thinks he's going to find a deputy in this group. I mean, he says Judd is over 80, and Barney says he can turn him into a deputy with a little training, and Andy goes, well, you better start. And then he heads out for his interview in Raleigh. And Opie runs up later to Barney and says this kid got his head caught in a sewer drain, and Barney calls the Department of Public Works to get that taken care of. Otis runs in and says he made a kid cross the street and caused him to skin his knee, and Barney gives him a first aid kit, and he leaves as we hear a bunch of honking and phones ringing. Otis comes in later saying the kid's mom hit him over the head with her purse, because as she told Barney earlier, they live on that street that Otis was making him try to cross. So this is just a hot mess.
Yeah, it's a whole hullabaloo.
And Aunt B comes in and says Barney needs to go outside, and there is a massive traffic jam. I mean, as massive as
for the streets of Mayberry.
As massive as it can get in Mayberry as we go to commercial. This episode was produced by Pod Machine. They do great podcasts at a great rate. Go to podmachine.com to learn more and enter Loaded Goat at checkout for a 10% discount. You know,
if you enter it twice, you might get 20%.
You won't get 20%. Don't listen to the man. So there's plenty of episodes where people have been left in charge and it doesn't work out. There's two that really come to mind. The first one on this is we always go back to Seinfeld because we love this show. But the episode where George is parking cars that day.
Yep.
And it ends up causing a traffic jam. He wrecks Jerry's rental. A guy has a stroke, and George prevents the ambulance from getting there. But this is like basically the equivalent of turning. You don't turn George Costanza loose on parking cars in Manhattan.
Yep, I agree.
And then the other one on a more serious, darker level is when Tony Soprano is in a coma in season 6 of The Sopranos, and they put Silvio in charge, and he basically has to be hospitalized because the stress just beats him down so much. Totally. Yeah. And after the break, Floyd says he hasn't seen a traffic jam like that since the 1939 World's Fair, which took place in New York City. So I guess Floyd must have gone up for that. And Barney says he doesn't think he has it in him to be sheriff, and Floyd doesn't disagree. And Andy gets back, and Floyd immediately tells him about the traffic jam. And Barney hopes Andy will say he didn't like Raleigh, but Andy says he liked it just fine, and then he heads home. And then Floyd just goes into one of his speeches about how he's going to miss cutting Andy's hair. And Barney says
Floyd is fantastic color in this episode.
Oh, he's awesome. He's awesome. And Barney says the way they can keep him is by causing a little trouble. And Floyd says, you being sheriff is trouble enough, but Barney has other ideas. And we cut to Barney and Andy pulling up to the filling station where Goober says he was robbed of $40 by a man in a black mask driving a red sports car. Naturally,
Andy's line to this.
Yeah, Andy is a bit skeptical. We cut to Barney discussing plans with Goober and Otis, who are both in separate cars and they're pointed in opposite directions. And Barney is leading on Goober's truck, and they both take off, and Barney falls over and hits the ground. This is actually like some real Buster Keaton work right here.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I was like, wow, I'd forgotten that. I mean, I was like, that's, basically hanging onto a moving car and falling over as it takes off. That's pretty impressive.
It is.
And at the jail, Barney calls Andy at home and wakes him up to tell him there are a bunch of wild kids in town. And the actual whooper is Goober, and Barney says he needs reinforcements.
I like to think that this was the Thunderbirds. What's the gang from Greece that they're all in? The T-Birds.
The T-Birds, yeah.
T-Birds.
The Van Buren boys.
The Van Buren boys have come through and they're wreaking havoc. I like Van Buren boys best.
Yeah. The next day at Floyd's, they are staging a robbery, and Andy comes in, and Floyd tells a story of a man who wanted a haircut. And Floyd said he had to wait. And so the man robbed him. And every time he keeps finishing, Floyd keeps going, he assaulted me.
I love it.
Yeah. And Andy pulls Barney outside and tells him he knows what he's trying to do, and he appreciates what Barney's trying to do, but he can stop. Barney says he doesn't want to be sheriff, and Andy says he doesn't need to worry about it because he's staying, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're like, you knew this was going to happen, but it's almost like Andy just seems really tired through all of this, like you said.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's not quite there.
Yeah. We cut to Andy taking the deputy badges from Otis, Judd, and Goober, and Andy tells Barney the key to being a good sheriff is staying calm. And we hear a wreck, and Andy and Barney run out to see Goober getting into it with someone in town. Andy goes to break it up. They won't shut up, and Andy is losing his patience. And Barney just leans against the pillar and gives Andy a wave as we go to commercial.
I like it.
I do like it too. Something tells me Goober probably shouldn't be allowed to drive.
No, I mean, you can kind of guess that.
Yeah.
I think any of these like big character actors that come on the show should not be allowed to drive.
All of them?
All of them.
So every character, Barney?
Like the big personality ones, right? Yeah. So Gomer, no, absolutely not. Who was the woman that kept making the pies in the first season?
Oh,
yeah.
I know who you're talking about.
She shouldn't be able to drive. The fun girl shouldn't be able to drive. Ernest T. Bass shouldn't be able to drive.
See, none of those folks drive though.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Otis drove a little bit, but decided he didn't want to do it after a while.
Yep.
So in the epilogue, Barney comes back into the jail and ribs Andy a bit. And Barney says he's going to go out on patrol, and he walks out the door, and Otis nails him with a tomato and laughs and says, see how you like it. And what's even better is he nailed Barney in the face. So Barney just is like almost shell-shocked as the whole thing has happened.
Yeah.
And that's how we close.
Can I give you my overall thought of this episode?
Yes, please.
I love Sober Otis. I thought that is a fun character, and we don't get to see much of that at all, kind of removed from his alcoholism, and I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Otis doesn't need to drink to have a good time.
Yeah.
No, I enjoyed it. I thought, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head how much Otis does how much of we see of Otis like coming in as the town drunk and opening the door. When they do return to Mayberry, he is kicked alcohol, and he's just so he's just a character in the show. But he's a character in the movie. But that I can't remember off the top of my head how much of this we see him as still drunken Otis. But yeah, I agree. This was a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, and he's still funny, not being boozy. He's just still funny as a goofy guy around town with a bit of an befuddled attitude.
Completely.
Yeah.
So I've got a bunch of construction equipment that's driving past my house if there's background noise.
Somebody, Barney Fife, sheriff in your town?
Barney Fife is doing a steamroller right now.
Yeah. Well, how many whistles would you give this?
I'm going to give this 8.
I'll give it 8. I'll give it 8. I mean, I think the only weak point of this whole thing is Andy not really being Andy just seeming off in this episode.
I agree.
I mean, you got great Floyd, you got great Barney. I think you've got everything else just really works extraordinarily well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
No, sir. It's been a pleasure to see your charming face, dewy as ever.
Likewise.
Not a pore on the skin.
I think pores. Everybody has pores. I think clogged pores are the issue. So check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you think about it, subscribe. Next week, we'll do the pageant. Till then, Christopher, I haven't seen a traffic jam like that since the 1982 World's Fair.
Honk, honk.